We've been waiting for the block Tyler Lockett himself. Great player, but your time is done, brother. Okay, we love you, but your time is done. Time to move on. We've been waiting for him to not be targeted. Well, the good news is he had just 2 targets. Let's talk about wide receivers that you should start, or more importantly, sit as we head into week 3 of the fantasy football season. We'll talk about every single team, 32 teams, 16 matchups in total, a lot to get through. Let's start with Thursday night football, and shout out to Amazon Prime. Just putting absolute bangers on Thursday night for us. Patriots at Jets. Waiting all day for Thursday night. Don't pretend like you're not excited for this one. All right, clearly this is not the game of the week, but let's talk about it. For the Patriots, nothing to discuss outside of Jalen Polk, who is a sneaky little stash, okay, playing a little bit more snaps. Caught the touchdown last week. When Drake May gets in there, who knows what he could do. Outside of that, this is a ghost town. Let's talk about the Jets, though. Garrett Wilson, clearly it has been disappointing thus far, his campaign with Aaron Rodgers. But here's the good news, guys. He's averaging 8.5 targets per game. The chemistry isn't fully there just yet, but you can see Rodgers trusting him more and more and more, and he is making some highlight plays. I believe we are on the cusp of a breakout. Don't forget that DK Metcalf just destroyed this secondary last week. The Patriots are 6th in points allowed to wide receivers. This could finally be the week that Garrett Wilson gets on track. What you have to hope, though, is that the Patriots can make this a competitive game. That's what you have to hope for Garrett Wilson. Okay, let's go to the second matchup of the week. This is the start of the Sunday 1 p.m. slate of games. We've got the Giants at the Browns, 38.5 point over-under, and the Browns are heavily favored in this one, as they should be. Malik Neighbors, one of my starts of the week last week. Now, he obviously dominated last week. 130 yards, a touchdown, 28 fantasy points. We love to see that, but this is different now. We're still going to label him a must start. I mean, the guy is averaging 65% of the targets in New York, which is bonkers. So we're still going to label him a must start, but you definitely need to lower your expectations for week 3, okay? You are no longer facing the Washington Commanders. You are now facing a legit defense in the Cleveland Browns. Great cornerback play, edge rushers that will get pressure on your quarterback. Daniel Jones, not great under pressure recently, but Malik Neighbors, again, you just can't sit a guy who just got 18 targets. Browns are 14th in points allowed to wide receivers, so at least there is hope. And then Amari Cooper, another game where Amari had a really ugly drop. This is back-to-back games. One of them should have been a touchdown. One of them should have been a huge gain. Now, I still have hope. He is still the highest targeted player on this team, 8.5 targets. He and Deshaun Watson just need to get in sync, and this could be the game where they do so. It's a great matchup versus the Giants. So look, this is a crucial week, I'll give you that, but I can't take Amari Cooper out of my lineup if I'm in a 12-man start 8. If you're in an 8-team start 7, of course you're not going to start Amari Cooper, but I'd say most people need to play him. And let's talk about Jerry Jeudy. Don't look now, but Jerry Jeudy is a wide receiver 29 in fantasy football at the time of recording this, and I don't think it's going to last, but it is something to consider. I mean, look, Jeudy is someone you can definitely think about in like a player prop perspective if you want to do some like over-unders and have fun with that, but I don't want him to touch my lineup. Maybe it's just purely take lock, but I don't want him to be in that lineup of mine. Okay, third matchup we'll talk about is the Bears at the Colts. Colts are favored in this one. This is tied for the closest spread of the week, so Vegas believes this will be a tight game. What do you guys think? Do you agree? Anthony Richardson, a little bit difficult to watch. Same on the opposite side, though, right, with Caleb Williams, a little bit difficult to watch. 2 quarterbacks who are not hitting their stride just yet. Let's start with the Colts side of the ball. This is a very difficult secondary to face. Jalen Johnson is one of the better cover corners in the NFL. This has been a tough matchup so far. They are 21st in points allowed to wide receivers, and Michael Pittman has been a nightmare. Not going to victory lap, but the reason we were not drafting Michael Pittman this offseason was because of Anthony Richardson. We just didn't know if we could trust him as a passer, completing about 50% of his passes through 3 interceptions last week. And so far, Michael Pittman has caught less than 50% of his targets, mostly because they have not been accurate targets. My wide receiver 31, you can spot start him. I am confident he will have some boom blow up games. I just don't know exactly when those will be. And this isn't a great matchup versus Jalen Johnson. I would say 65% of people have a better name to play this week. Alec Pierce, what a strange story Alec Pierce is. He's the wide receiver 8 on the season so far, which is insane to say out loud. Back-to-back weeks with a touchdown. I still don't buy it. I don't know. I'm sorry, guys. I still don't buy it. I'm still not starting Alec Pierce. You can tell me in the comments if I'm an idiot, but something to consider here, okay? Number one, how many of those passes are going to be accurate from A-Rich? You got lucky a little bit with some of those deep balls. Number two, if Josh Downs comes back this week, which there's a chance he could, we're not talking about him in this video, but if Josh Downs comes back, then there's now even more mouths to feed in an already crowded wide receiver room. So personally, I don't feel comfortable starting Alec Pierce. I get if you want to throw him out there, clearly there's upside. And then with Adonai Mitchell, you just can't play the guy no matter what. As far as the Bears go, DJ Moore, my wide receiver 17 this week, definitely a must start. This is a secondary where if Caleb Williams is going to turn it around, it's got to be versus this defense. The Colts defense is bleeding rushing yards. They are bleeding passing yards. This has got to be the week Caleb figures it out. If there is a week that Caleb figures it out. Here's the good news. DJ Moore is averaging 9 targets per game through the first 2 weeks. He is a must start for me. Great matchup. I'm going to trust him. I'm going to trust that they're going to figure it out. Now we have to talk about Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze. Keenan Allen, if he plays, will be a must start for me. Why? Because in week 1, he had 11 targets and almost got into the end zone. And this is a very good matchup. I believe he will be the number 2, even if Rome Odunze is playing and Keenan Allen are there, right? I think Keenan's number 2. Now, if Keenan plays, we do not want to start Odunze. He is week to week with that knee injury. He did play in this game. It is still bothering him a little bit, but all signs are that he plays. Now, if Keenan Allen is out for this game, Rome Odunze would become my wide receiver 34, so he would be in that spot start category. You could start him in that scenario, but again, unless Keenan doesn't play, I'm not putting Odunze out there with Keenan playing as well. All right, the fourth matchup we will look at here is the Texans at the Vikings. This is a very exciting matchup to talk about when we're thinking fantasy wide receivers. Nico Collins is a wide receiver 2 on the year. He is absolutely dominating so far, averaging 9 targets per game, getting great targets from CJ Stroud, looking like a superstar. Stephon Diggs averaging 6 targets per game, had a boom game in week 1, a down game in week 2, and then Tank Dell, who is probably the person that you guys are most concerned about right now in this video. My wide receiver 30 coming into the week, I get it. It's definitely difficult to see him only get 4 targets, but if you peel behind the curtain, I can tell you the good news is all of these guys are running a similar amount of routes, so it's not like route participation is a hindrance for Tank Dell. I still feel like there will be some boom gains for Tank Dell, but we talked about this Texans wide receiver room, guys. We talked about it before the year. We said, look, the ball is going to fall somewhere. Like, these guys are not going to be consistently good every single week. Now, so far, Nico Collins has been bust-proof, but it just feels like every week one of these guys is going to bust. You have to be aware of that, but you also have to start them for the boom games, and this could be one for Tank Dell. All right, let's talk about Justin Jefferson. At the time of recording this, there's no indication that he will miss time. Of course, if reports change throughout the week, we'll keep you updated on our live stream, but of course, you're starting him. Jordan Addison did not play last week with that ankle injury. We will have to monitor that as the week progresses. There's a report out that he could, so if he is in there, I definitely think he's a spot start option. I'm thinking game script. I know the Texans are going to be able to score points. Now, Jordan Addison could be a necessary part of this offense. In week 1, Addison played 51% of the snaps, had 4 targets. If theoretically he played 90% of the snaps, you could have seen him with about 7 targets or so. So he's definitely a viable option. And let's be real, Sam Darnold is not looking that bad so far. Okay, the fifth matchup we're going to look at here is the Eagles at the Saints. 49.5 point over-under. The Eagles are favored, tied for the second highest over-under of the week. Eagles are coming off that crushing last-minute loss versus the Falcons. The offense is flying higher than any other offense in the NFL right now. I can't believe I'm saying that. Derek Carr is dominating. Those words, I can't even believe that they are being spewed from my mouth hole, but they are. Derek Carr is dominating. Let's talk about the Saints. Fantastic matchup. The Eagles are giving up the second most points to fantasy wide receivers through 2 weeks. Definitely, they looked better last night. I'll give them credit for that. But we have to keep in mind that the Falcons' game plan was to attack them on the ground. What do you think the Saints' game plan will be? So far, they definitely like to air the ball out a little bit, right? So I am starting Chris Olave, my wide receiver 15. He reclaimed the wide receiver 1 usage in week 2. It didn't lead to the most fantasy points. Shaheed outscored him, but he did get 6 targets compared to Shaheed's 4. So that is definitely encouraging moving forward. I do think Olave is someone that I am going to continue to start. I get it. Shaheed has been very, very good, but I think Olave will be more consistent rest of season. I still believe that. I really do. But Shaheed is a name that you can start. My wide receiver 33, a solid spot start, a really fun wild card. I'm not convinced that the shoe isn't going to drop at some point. I'll be honest. Remember, guys, last year in 2023, 5 games over 15 points for Shaheed, 10 games under 8 points. We have seen him be a boom bust player. He's been consistent so far, but when you're only getting 4.5 targets per game, eventually it will stop. Eventually you will bust, so you guys just have to be aware of that. Now, let's also talk about the Eagles. Devonta Smith did very well on Monday Night Football in a featured role. He had 10 targets. Great to see. He caught 7 of them, got into the end zone, 20 PPR points. Of course, you're going to start him. There is no A.J. Brown to compete with targets. He's not going to play for a couple weeks, and there's not another wide receiver that really concerns you about Devonta Smith. A top 20 play for me, locked and loaded. All right, the 5th matchup we will look at here is Chargers at Steelers. 36.5 point over under. The Steelers are favored at home, and this is tied for one of the closest spreads of the week, meaning this should be a very competitive game. Let's talk about the Chargers for a second. I believe we could see a back and forth between Quentin Johnston and Ladd McConkey on a weekly basis as far as who's the fantasy wide receiver to own. That does scare me. I can't confidently tell you to start either one of these names. And we also have to consider that this offense loves to run the ball. There's just not a lot of volume. I mean, for example, last week, Johnston got 6 targets. That was 31% of the target share. They only threw the ball 19 times. So is that going to happen again versus Steelers? We'll have to wait and see. But in deeper formats, I do think you can throw Quentin or Ladd out there. It's just, I don't know if the consistency will be there. Let's talk about the Steelers side of the ball. George Pickens is a spot start. He's on the edge of like a spot and a must start. If you're in a 12-team league, I don't see how you sit him, but it just depends on what your options are. Chargers have been pretty locked down versus wide receivers so far, but Pickens really only needs one play to pay off. He's a big play wide receiver. All right, the 7th matchup we'll look at here is the Broncos at the Bucks. 39.5 point over under. The Bucks are heavily favored. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but the over unders on all these betting sites are drastically lowered. It seems like offenses are really struggling this year. But let's talk about the Bucks side of the ball. At the point of recording this video, the Broncos are one of the most difficult matchups in fantasy football. They are 31st in points allowed, and I do not care. I am still starting Mike Evans and Chris Godwin with ultimate confidence. Chris Godwin has been a start of the week for me in back-to-back weeks, and it has paid off both times. We're going to continue to ride the wave with him. At the moment of recording this, he is a top 3 wide receiver in fantasy football, at least points. And beyond fantasy football, he is PFF's highest graded receiver through 2 weeks. So the guy is dominating. He was on our bounce back video. Hopefully you were with us in the preseason and you got to watch that. Now, Mike Evans had a down week, but you don't sit Mike Evans at any point ever. Let's talk about the Broncos. I don't see how you'd be excited to start any one of these names. So that's pretty much all I'm going to say. Bo Nix is not playing well. The targets aren't very accurate. I don't see how you play any of these names. I mean, Josh Reynolds might be a fun guy to do a player prop on, but not someone you want to trust with your lineup. The 8th matchup we will look at here is the Packers at the Titans. 36.5 point over under. The Titans are favored at home. Let's start with those Tennessee Titans. Calvin Ridley definitely proved me wrong last week, big time. He was a player I was very nervous to start. Clearly, it did not pan out. I would argue if you watch the game, a little bit fluky here and there. I mean, the targets were still relatively inaccurate. He had some pretty bad drops. How often are you going to get a jet sweep for a touchdown? I don't know, but ultimately I am taking accountability. I was totally wrong on the Ridley call last week. We are going to start him this week, my wide receiver 25, but we're starting him because we feel much better about this matchup versus the Green Bay Packers. Great matchup. I still don't buy into him that much rest of season. Like, I don't know how you can watch Will Levis right now and be excited about Calvin Ridley, but maybe I'm being too stubborn on my prior opinions, right? But you can't start another name here in Tennessee. You guys probably know that. Now, as far as the Packers side of the ball, I don't see how you start any name until we have Jordan Love back in the lineup. So what's funny enough is a wide receiver did score a touchdown last week. Malik Neighbors threw his first ever passing touchdown, but it was to Dontavion Wicks, which was in nobody's lineup. We love Wicks, by the way, but Jaden Reed was a bust. Christian Watson had no targets, no receptions. Romeo Doubs had under 10 PPR points. How in the world are you supposed to start any name here? You can't. It will probably bust your week. You have got to look for alternate options, especially in a matchup versus the Tennessee Titans, who are 29th in points allowed to fantasy wide receivers. They are locked down as a secondary since they got L'Jarius Sneed. Okay, this brings us to the start of the afternoon slate of games, if you will. You know, after that first slate, there's a huge slate of games in the afternoon. I prefer that. I'm so excited for this week. So the first one we'll talk about is Panthers at Raiders. And the Raiders are heavily favored. Thank God Andy Dalton is starting at quarterback for the Carolina Panthers. Okay. Finally, there is some hope to look at for this team offensively. The last time, guys, Andy Dalton started for the Panthers was week 3 of the 2023 season last year. In that game, Andy Dalton threw 58 times, but he threw 361 passing yards and 2 passing touchdowns. And if you look at his receiving room, Adam Thielen had 14 targets, 145 yards and a touchdown. DJ Chark had 86 yards and a touchdown on 11 targets. Why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because if you drafted Deontay Johnson, there is now reason for optimism. I'm not even going to say hope. I'm just going to say optimism, all right? There is reason for optimism with Deontay Johnson. The hope is, will these targets be accurate? Will they be more comfortable passing the ball with a guy like Andy Dalton? I have labeled Deontay Johnson a spot start. I don't think you can start him. Like I said, deeper formats, sure, throw him in there, but smaller leagues, I think you have a better name. But let's talk about the Raiders side of the ball. Davante Adams explodes in week 2 versus a very good Baltimore secondary. 12 targets, 110 yards and a TUD, 26 fantasy points, and it really all came in the fourth quarter, which was very strange, but that could be a sign of things to come. Here's the issue with this matchup. Most teams beat the Panthers on the ground. They exploit them through the run game. So that is something you should consider. Davante Adams might be game script removed from necessity, if that makes sense. Like, they might not need him in this game. It might be a Zamir White, Alexander Madison game, but he is the only name you can consider starting there. Clearly, he is a superstar talent. We know that. Okay, the 10th matchup we're going to look at here. Let's go to Dolphins at Seahawks, 41.5 point over under. Let's talk about the Dolphins side of the ball first. There will be no Tua, at least at the time of recording this, there will be no Tua in week 2. I guess some miraculously things could happen, right? English is hard. But at the moment, it doesn't look like there will be Tua. So if it is Skylar Thompson or a different quarterback, we have to ask ourselves, what should our expectations be with the Miami wide receiver core, assuming Tua's out? Well, I can tell you, in the era of the Tyreek, Waddle, Tua tags trio, in that era, here are the averages for these wide receivers without Tua. So Tyreek is averaging just under 16 points per game without Tua. That's definitely still someone you want in your lineup. Waddle, however, is averaging under 11 points per game without Tua at 10.5 PPR points. That is not someone I get that excited about. And we're talking about a guy who was getting, 5-6 targets in Jalen Waddle, but they were really good, accurate targets from Tua. Now, that's not going to be the case. So Tyreek is still a must start for me. I'm definitely still going to play him. Now that you are without Tua, you can scheme up ways to get him involved. But Jalen Waddle is someone I'm a little bit more concerned about. He's a spot start for me. And I think in most smaller leagues, you'll have a better name. The Seahawks. Oh my gosh, this is what we have been waiting for, guys. If you've been on the channel this offseason, you know I have been so annoying talking about how excited I am for this new Seahawks offense. They're going to spread the ball out a lot. And then in week 1, it was an absolute egg for the Seahawks passing offense. But in week 2, we finally saw what we wanted to see. DK Metcalf, 13 targets. More importantly, Jackson Smith-Njigba, my beautiful JSN, finally with 16 targets. 16 targets. He had a 38% target share, and he absolutely dominated. It was so fun to watch. We are officially labeling DK and JSN must starts, and the best news of all, we've been waiting for the cock block Tyler Lockett himself. Great player, but your time is done, brother. Okay, we love you, but your time is done. Time to move on. We've been waiting for him to not be targeted. Well, the good news is he had just 2 targets in that game where they threw the ball a ton. This is great news. Very good news moving forward. So we are going to start JSN, and we are ready to be hurt. I am absolutely ready to be hurt again. All right, let's talk about the Lions at the Cardinals. This is the highest over-under of the week, 52.5 points. The Lions are favored away from home. I am absolutely obsessed with this matchup for fantasy football purposes. If you think about it, on one side, you have the Lions, who give up the second most points to fantasy wide receivers. On the opposite side, you have the Cardinals, who give up the 9th most points to fantasy wide receivers. And if you look at my rankings, you got 2 wide receivers in the top 10 of my rankings this week, and you've got another in my top 24 in Jameson Williams. How fun has it been to see full-time Jameson Williams? Are there any Jameson Williams truthers out there like myself, and we've been waiting for this time? I am so excited to see this. At the moment, he's a top 10 wide receiver in fantasy football. He's averaging 10 targets per game, which is absolutely mental. Amon-Ra St. Brown proved again why he is the number 1 wide receiver on this team last week with 19 targets. So far, Dan Campbell is downplaying the injury. He says he's going to be good, so we'll trust him at his word for that. And then as far as Marvin Harrison Jr. goes, I mean, we told you last week, don't lose hope. Do not panic sell. Wait on Marvin Harrison Jr. And he rewarded those people who did greatly with a 29-point game in PPR formats, 2 touchdowns. He looked electric. He looked dynamic in the open field, diving for the touchdown, doing the Superman. We're definitely continue to start him as well. So exciting to see. All right, the 12th matchup we will look at is the Ravens at the Cowboys. This is an interesting matchup, okay? The Ravens are favored on FanDuel, even though they are going to Dallas. I mean, interesting, okay? Interesting. Tied for the second highest over-under, so there should be some fantasy cheese, and it's tied for the closest spread. So theoretically, sportsbooks are thinking this will be a close game, which is what we want to see for our wide receivers, game script-wise. You've got the Cowboys side of the ball here first. CeeDee Lamb, you're going to start him. It's a great matchup. The Ravens are top 5 in points allowed to wide receivers so far through 2 weeks. Of course, you're starting CeeDee Lamb, but let's talk about Brandon Cooks and Jalen Tolbert. Jalen Tolbert is a name to watch simply because last week he led this team in snap share, targets. He has been a player that we've been waiting to break out for quite some time. And if he does break out, that could mean that Brandon Cooks might have to die for Jalen Tolbert to live. We'll have to monitor that. But at this moment, you can't start either of those names, even in a desperation scenario, because it's so confusing. Zay Flowers, it was so great to see his depth of target go up. It was so great to see him targeted downfield. He's such a talented wide receiver. That gives me so much hope moving forward for Zay Flowers. He's my wide receiver 19 this week, coming off 10.5 targets per game through 2 weeks, and facing a offense that should be able to score points in the Dallas Cowboys. This could be another huge week for Zay Flowers. All right, the 13th game we're going to talk about is the 49ers at the Rams, 43.5 point over under, and the 49ers are heavily favored away from home, as they should be. The Rams wide receiver core, offensive line, it's all a shit show right now. So let's talk about this wide receiver room. Demarcus Robinson, my wide receiver 35. I think he's a fine spot start in deeper formats. He led the team in snaps, routes run last week, but I do think there's a sneaky play here in Jordan Whittington. I'm not going to play him in any format. I've labeled him a must sit, but rather than I shouldn't say play, I should really say stash. I really do feel like Jordan Whittington should be stashed on every single league. Why do I say that? Okay, Demarcus Robinson targeted on 14.3% of his routes run. Jordan Whittington, who didn't play the first half at all right, when Cooper Kupp went out, he played every single snap from the second half onwards. And he was targeted on 15.4% of his routes run. Tyler Johnson, who we've already seen in a full-time role, was targeted on just 12% of his routes run. So if you look at routes run per target, basically, you are seeing Jordan Whittington lead the room in that category. Will that be a trend that will continue? I don't know, but it's super interesting to me. This is why I wanted to pick up Jordan Whittington off the waiver wire this week. Keep in mind, that Sean McVay loves to create this found gem late in drafts. Did it with Kyron Williams, did it with Puka Nacua. Why not Jordan Whittington? And remember, Jordan Whittington is a very exciting prospect from a yak perspective. That could be something that Sean McVay is drooling over. He wants to be like that guy who found the gym, you know? So anyway, we're only going to spot start DeMarcus Robinson there, but it's technically a good matchup. And the Niners are top 3 in points allowed per game so far. But with the Niners side of the ball, Deebo Samuel is not going to play. Calf strain. He will be out multiple weeks. What the hell is going on in San Francisco? What's up with these calf strains? Y'all got to figure that stuff out. But Brandon Ayuk, yes, we're going to continue to start him. Looks like training camp matters, doesn't it? I mean, it looks like that stuff actually matters. He's been a little rusty, but they're going to have to lean on him heavily. You've got to put him in your lineups. Let's move on to Sunday Night Football. We've got the Chiefs at the Falcons here. 46.5 point over under. The Chiefs are favored at Atlanta. Rashee Rice, my guy. If you've been on the channel, you know how much I love Rashee Rice. We got to keep starting him, guys. My wide receiver 6 this week. I know that sounds high, but with the amount of injuries to important wide receivers, it's really not that high. I think that's appropriately ranking him. Now let's talk about Xavier Worthy. You know, we always ask you guys every week with Xavier Worthy, do you like to party? And we say that because not every party is a good party. You can go to a party and have a really good time and meet good people. You can go to a party, get messed up, it ruins your life for the next couple weeks. You can do some stupid stuff online. And unfortunately, week 2 was that version of the party. There just wasn't enough volume to go around. So you can put him in your lineup as a spot start, high upside type of play, but you have to recognize there's a very low floor at this moment. We will also talk about the Falcons here. Drake London is a must start. He bounces back late in the fourth quarter versus the Eagles, gets that touchdown. You can start him. And Darnell Mooney is definitely something to monitor. He should be on every roster, of course, but let's see if he continues to get more and more targets. All right, this takes us to the Monday Night Football doubleheader, which I couldn't be less excited about. Like, genuinely, who in the NFL do we need to talk about? Nobody wants this. Not a single one of your fans are asking for a doubleheader on Monday night. We don't like it. It's inconvenient. Stop doing it. I digress. The first Monday night doubleheader is Jags at Bills, 46.5 point over under. Christian Kirk, not a player I'm looking to play. You know, we weren't high on Christian Kirk coming in. He's had 3.5 targets per game over the first 2 games. It's looking very bleak. Brian Thomas, however, the big deep play threat, he can repay you playing him with just a single target. He is someone that should grow his role as well over the course of a season. So I think you can spot start him. Thinking about game script wise, the Jags are going to need to throw the ball. So that's encouraging as well for this wide receiver room. And then talking about the Bills, there's no clear alpha in this wide receiver room. In week 1, Keon Coleman led the team in targets. In week 2, Keon Coleman had 0 targets. How am I possibly supposed to tell you to start him? Then in week 2, Khalil Shakir goes up to about 70% of the snaps, lead the team in targets in a game where they don't need to throw the ball. So we don't really know how to value that. So look, you can spot start Khalil Shakir in like very, 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 very deep formats, but this is possibly just a wide receiver room that you just want to avoid on a weekly basis. All right, the next and last game we'll talk about the doubleheader here. We've got Commanders at Bengals, 48.5 point over under. Bengals are heavy favorites. They are the biggest favorites of the week, projected to score 30 points in this one, over 30 points in a 48.5 point over under. They are huge, huge, huge favorites. The Bengals, guys, I am starting every single Bengal I can with the utmost confidence heading into week 3. I cannot wait to start Bengals. Joe Burrow's in play. The running backs are in play. Jamar Chase is one of the best plays this week. T. Higgins, please play in this one because you will go off if you do. T. Higgins, a wide receiver 14 for me in my week 3 rankings. I'm so excited about this matchup. The Commander secondary is booty cheeks. I say this as a Commanders fan. And by the way, if T. Higgins is out, Andre Yeshivas does become a spot start for me at wide receiver 40. But if T. Higgins plays, I don't think you can play him. On the opposite side of the ball, Jaden Daniels has looked good. He really has. But he just isn't stretching the field vertically right now. It's so many wide receiver screens in this Cliff Kingsbury offense. It doesn't look fun. It's not fun to watch, that's for sure. I do think Terry and Jaden Daniels will get on the same page at some point. But until that point comes, he's probably going to ride my bench. So Those are all the matchups. I appreciate y'all for watching the video. Do me a favor, smash the like button, subscribe if you like the content. Last thing I'll say is if you're facing a difficult start-sit predicament this week, or if you have a trade question or whatever the case may be, check out the pinned comment. There is a link where you can ask us a question at any time, and we will reply to you through our fantastic website, Flock Fantasy. I appreciate y'all for watching. Good luck this week. Hopefully this was helpful. Let me know if it was, and I'll see you in the next one. All love. Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, LAND, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.